Welcome back to the Hive. I'm Cammie.
And I'm Caleb.
And we're
the Beesons.
All right. So on this episode, we are going to get into our NICU stay and the following months after bringing Bridger home that were quite something. So first things first, we are going to chat a little bit about our weekend, kind of what we did this weekend and previous week since our last episode.
Yeah, it was a busy Labor Day weekend. We had family in town from Colorado.
Yes.
Cammie's brother and sister-in-law are from Colorado, and they were in for the holiday. And
our niece.
And our 3-month-old niece came with them. And so it was exciting to have all of the young little cousins together. And Rin was in love with her and keeps asking where she is now that they've gone home. Yep. And so it was a really good weekend, and we had quite the surprise planned.
We did, yes. I decided a couple of weeks ago, since my brother is turning next month, the big 30, that we should throw a little surprise party for him, since this was going to be the last time that they would be back in Kansas before the holiday season, before his birthday. Next time will you see him, it will be probably for like Thanksgiving. So I was like, why don't we do that? So I talked to his wife, my sister-in-law, and we concocted a plan together. And so I was in charge of getting everything ready, getting the cake and getting decorations and food and like all of that kind of stuff. And thankfully we were able to pull it off.
Yeah, it was exciting. It was nice to have a bunch of family and friends all on the same roof. There was a few that we hadn't seen in a couple of years. So it was nice to have everybody just hang out together and eat burgers and cake and all the good stuff.
Have a good time.
And it was also fun because while Cammie was planning it the day prior and getting organized and getting food ready and decorations ready, me and my brother-in-law went to a K-State game in Manhattan. It was fun but incredibly hot. We got to Manhattan, and at game time the temperature was like 102 degrees, 103 degrees. And we were also in the upper tier of the stadium, and facing right towards the sun. And so it was brutally hot. Luckily, I didn't get sunburnt, which is a huge blessing, because I thought I was going to get burnt for sure. But thank God for sunscreen that we put on before the game. And we sweated it out. K-State got a big win. It was hot, though. We had a bottle of water we each brought in with us, and by the time we finished drinking it, it tasted like boiling water. And so it was brutally hot, but it was, like I said, it was a fun time with my brother-in-law. It was a busy weekend. But
you did get to come home to ice cream that night.
We did.
I got you an ice cream when I got me and Rin a treat.
That is true. And the ice cream hit the spot after sitting in 100-degree heat. And so that was awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a fun, busy, quick weekend, but we got to spend a lot of time with family that we don't get to see very often. And so wish they lived closer, but yeah, now that we all have kiddos, it's hard to just kind of pick up and go. So we're really thankful and glad that they got to come in and we got to spend time with them.
It was a good time.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I have a couple of questions. Every time we do a podcast, like the day or so prior, I'm going to put up a question box in my Instagram stories or our podcast Instagram, either one. So just kind of make sure you're following both of those. And yeah, just a question box for you to ask any questions about the previous episode or episode that we're going to do, or just any questions you feel like you have. So I'm going to answer a couple real quick before we get into the episode. So the first one is asking, did I pump or breastfeed or give formula, and how was the transition once he got home from the NICU? So with this question, with Rin, I breastfed until she was from the minute she was born until she was about 10 and a half months, because by that time she had literally 10 teeth by the time she was 10 months. And so she was eating every and all foods. So
she was ready to eat steak by that point.
Literally. So she weaned herself right around 10 months, 10 and a half. And that's when I stopped breastfeeding her. But yes, I did that. So I knew going into having Bridger, my supply was great. Didn't have any issues with Rin. So I was planning the same for him, preparing everything the same. And so the day after he was born, I talked to the doctor in the NICU that he had that day, And we kind of went over like, what do you want to do? Do you want to breastfeed? Or is that your goal? Do you want to give formula? What do you want to do? And I told him I had no problem with the supply with Rin. And so I was planning to do the same with Bridger, breastfeed. And obviously that would look different with him being in the NICU, and we didn't know for how long, but I was going to plan on pumping. And I started pumping the day literally the day he was born. Just a couple hours after he was born, I started pumping and started getting colostrum. And so the doctor on call there agreed to give another couple of days for my milk to come in, and that way then they would start giving it to him through the feeding tube, which was okay with me. And I was like, okay, thank you. But if you are pumping mama, you know that literally means every 3 hours you got to pump. If you're not breastfeeding him, you got to pump. And obviously I couldn't because he wasn't there with me. So I pumped every 3 hours, no matter where I was. I brought him to church with me. I brought him in the car. Every time we would go up to the NICU, I would have to have them. Like, those pumps went with me everywhere. They were in my bag. I even had to wake up in the night and pump. I remember getting questions or comments about like, well, at least if he's in the NICU, at least you're getting to sleep and not having to wake up with a newborn in the night, and which was not true because I still had to wake up and pump in order to keep my supply up and going. And so thankfully I was able to stash a lot of milk, and I brought up fresh milk to the NICU every single day. And so they would start giving that to them. The only thing I did have which we can get into a little bit here later, but have an issue with was they did not honor my wishes and only give strict breast milk. I asked that they could do that, and that if I wasn't able to provide or make enough milk, then at the very last resort give formula, which I found out later did not honor that. And so we'll get into that later. But anyway, yes, I was able to pump, and thankfully when he was able to start breastfeeding a couple weeks into his stay, he latched right away, didn't have any issues. And then once we got home, I solely breastfed and have been breastfeeding since. And we are weaning now, and almost completely weaned from nursing because he also has a ton of teeth and is eating just fine every food.
The kid is a garbage disposal. Yes. That kid will eat anything you put in front of him. You could go pick a piece of grass from outside and he'd eat it.
Literally. He's like, food, give it to me.
So he loves it. And so we're almost done with the breastfeeding journey for this kid.
Yes. So. Yep. And then the other question was my home birth restricted due to gestation restrictions or due to my midwives? And yes. So with midwives, you have to be full term, which is 37 weeks in order to deliver with them. And obviously I was only 33 weeks. So I could not do that, had to do it at a hospital. Mm-hmm. But I was still able to do vaginally birth and unmedicated 100%, which is exactly what I wanted, just not where I wanted. But a lot of times, I've gotten the question, oh, so you had to have a C-section since you was so early. I'm like, nope. Thankfully, I still was able to do a vaginal birth just like I wanted.
And luckily, our midwife was still there. We mentioned that in the last episode. But she was still although it was in a hospital, she was still in the delivery room with us.
She was able to come.
There to support us.
Yep. Yeah. So those were the questions. Like I said, if you have any others, please feel free to send them our way. Comment on the post. We always make a post every day that we post a new episode on our podcast page on Instagram, which is the Hive Podcast 2_. Feel free to comment on there any questions that you may have for our next episodes.
Yeah, so we'll get into this episode a little bit. And so this is kind of a part 2 from last week's. So Bridger was born 6 weeks early. Yep. And as we mentioned, we tried to have a midwife home birth, but it just didn't pan out because he came so early and Cammy wasn't full term. So we wound up having it in the hospital. If you want to listen to that story, you can go to the previous episode. But basically, after he was born, we basically got a quick picture with him. They had Cammy stay where she was at, obviously, because they had to make sure she was all right and deliver the placenta and all that. And they basically said, Dad, come with us, and we're going to go straight to the NICU. And he came out, honestly, I thought pretty fine. Yeah. Like, he was screaming and crying like any other baby. Like, when I went over to the table, they told me he was almost 6 pounds, even though he was 6 weeks early. And so we were like, oh, wow. Like we figured we'd probably have a NICU stay just because of how early he was. But, like, when they said he was 6 pounds and he was crying really loud. He was
5'11".
Well, 5'11". And then he was crying really loud. I was like, oh, we'll probably have like a
his lungs worked just fine.
They were super excellent. And so we were like, oh, we're going to be out of here in like probably 2 or 3 days, like at max. And so we were wrong.
I was not thinking that. I knew it would be at least a week. At least I was thinking a week, like minimum.
And so basically they took us to the NICU, showed us where they were going to set the bed up at, and then I remember having to go back to Cammy because they had to start getting him all hooked up to oxygen and feeding tubes. And he had when he was first born, he had so many wires
so many
attached to him, and he had IVs. He had his wires for his heart rate monitors and his breathing monitors,
breathing tube,
all those things. And so our midwife was so nice, and I remember I went back to the delivery room, and she had bought us lunch since she was there and didn't get to deliver our kids since she was early, so she did buy us lunch, and we kind of sat in that delivery room for a short amount of time, and then that's kind of where our journey to the NICU started. And so it lasted for a while, so we'll kind of, I guess, go through the progression a little bit. So the biggest thing that he had was, they said, was his lungs weren't developed as much as they should be. And basically they have like levels of breathing machines that you kind of promote downward to, where you kind of wean off of these machines. And he was on like pretty high level machine and pretty high level oxygen. And so we couldn't hold him. We couldn't hold him for
about 3 days.
Yeah, it was about 2 or 3 days. And so that was really hard. All you could really do is, they called it like, I forget what the word was, but they called it like back rubbing or something, where you weren't, well, it wasn't even rubbing baby. You could just like pat the baby. And so it was really hard when you have a kid and you can't touch your kid. You can't hold your kid really. Like you could kind of just barely touch his hands with all the wires and stuff he had him on. So it was really hard. It was way different than Rin, where Rin, she was born, they threw her on Cammy's chest. We got to interact with her and stuff like that.
Immediately started breastfeeding, like just having that skin to skin. Like if you have, there's no other way to describe it. You will never understand unless you go through the same experience. Unless you have a baby in the NICU and you physically have to leave the hospital without your baby, you will never understand what that feeling is like. Being a mom, having your child, and then physically leaving without your child and knowing that they have to stay there, like you cannot take them regardless of anything, is just, it's an emotion that you can never convey. Like you just, you will never understand it unless you go through it. It is so hard.
Well, and that's kind of the weird thing, because I've grown up like with a ton of Facebook friends who have had NICU babies, and you don't really think much about it. Like you're like, I mean, it's sad for anybody who's in the NICU, but like you don't understand the depth of what they go through,
the emotions that you go through.
Honestly, go through it yourself. And so it's just, I don't know. I've learned a new compassion for NICU parents, and like if I ever see somebody now who's either going through the NICU or possibly gonna have a NICU, like I make sure I reach out, because I understand how you could say lonely that journey is, and how like stressful that journey is. And so so I guess going into a little bit more, Bridger was on oxygen. He was on feeding tubes, and so he was on that way for what?
He was on the breathing until literally about a week. Not even a week. It was about 5 days before we brought him home. He was on breathing, which we will tread lightly here, but
So disclaimer before we start. I got to give this disclaimer. So Cammy and I are not necessarily anti-doctor, anti-nurse, anti-hospital. Now, is it our preference? No. Like we prefer more natural, more holistic, things like that. We respect doctors. We respect nurses. We respect hospitals for what they do. I even tell people, like, look, it's better to go to the hospital and be sure, like, than be sorry later. But at the same time, that's just not the path that Cam and I prefer. So I say this disclaimer to say it might sound like we're dissing on doctors, dissing on nurses, dissing on the hospital. We're not. Like, honestly, there were some staff at the hospital who we really love and appreciate and are still super thankful for this day. But there were some extremely frustrating points. So
as a parent and as a parent of a child in the NICU, and knowing that most of the staff, if not all of them that we dealt with, has never gone through that experience, I think is a huge difference also, because they don't understand what it's like to be a parent, having your child there where you physically have to leave them every single day and go home without them. And you're sitting there at home wondering, are they being taken care of? They're obviously not getting held like I would be holding them at home. They're not getting that love. They're not getting that attention because they have other babies they have to take care of too. And we obviously understand that, but it's so hard being a parent, leaving your child there and trusting these strangers that you don't know. And like, yes, the doctors and the nurses try to make it as comfortable and as what I want to say, like, comforting to you as they can. But it's not the same as having your baby at home with you. So that's just where it's a frustrating thing too. Cause it's nothing against them. You want your baby home. You have a baby, they're yours. You carry them for 9 months. You want them to be home with you. And when they're not, and you can't do anything about it, it's so hard. And those emotions, especially postpartum, right after you have a baby, are fresh and the hormones are raging, and it's just, yeah, it's rough.
Yeah. Kind of go into like a fight or flight kind of mode. And so the crazy thing that I guess you could say kind of sucked about the NICU was we spent a lot of time at the hospital, but really we didn't get updates like overnight or things like that. And so every morning when we would turn that corner to his little area of the NICU, like we didn't know what we were going to see. We didn't know if he was going to be on more tubes or have tubes removed or things like that. Now they did have a line you could call in if you wanted to, but Cam and I didn't want to like be overbearing, so we didn't call it a whole lot. But they didn't really have any way to update like stuff real time, and so you didn't know if he progressed overnight or if he
it would have been so nice. We talked about this so many times. It would have been so nice to just get like a little 1-2 sentence update just of a couple of things that maybe they changed through the day, or what they tried, or how he was doing, or even if nothing really changed, just he had a good day today, like something simple like that. Just like quick 1 or 2 sentence, that's it. Some type of communication in order to let us parents know, especially those of us that have children at home that can't be up there all day, every day, like other parents could.
And that was going into that was probably the hardest thing about the NICU is the fact that we had Renly at home. So Renly at the time was only
19 months.
So basically a year and a half, basically. And so to get to the long part of the story, we were in the NICU for 37 days total. And so for those 37 days, almost every single day of that, we had to find some place to basically pawn Ren off, like in our daughter, and either find my parents to watch her, or my sisters, or people from like our friends groups. And that was really hard, is trying to organize that while you're dealing with everything going on in the NICU. And at the same time, it breaks your heart as a parent because you're focusing all your attention on your baby in the NICU. But meanwhile, Ren is being pawned off on basically everybody that we know, and you feel like you're missing out on 37 days of her life too. And so it was a really, really hard time.
And she handled it so well.
She did amazing.
She did so good, and she's always been the child. She's never had attachment issues or separation anxiety or anything like that. Thank the Lord. And I know he designed her that way for this specific reason, because if she had, it would have been so much worse. So thankfully she did so good, but it was so hard to leave her and know for 37 days that she could not meet her brother, because they obviously don't allow kids back there, which for obvious reasons, we understood that. But again, that was challenging in and of itself, because anytime we didn't have somewhere for Ren to go, we would have to bring her to the hospital with us when we would go to see him. But that meant our stay with him was shorter and she couldn't go back. So literally one of us would sit in the waiting room with her while one goes back for about 20-30 minutes. And then that one would come out, and then we would switch, and the other one of us would go back and sit with him for another 20-30 minutes while the other sat with Ren. So doing that for 37 days on the times that we had to take her was very much a challenge as well. And Caleb also worked. He did not take off work except for the day we had him, literally, or the day after. I think he did too. But after that, he went back to work. He didn't take off because I told him, I was like, it makes no sense for you to be off now because he's not home. Like, I'm fine. I don't need help taking care of myself. Like, I'm okay after birth. And that's just how I am after birth. I'm not the type that's going to stay in bed, do nothing. Oh, I need you to wait on me hand and foot. Like, that is just not me. I am up and I'm at him. I am going. That's just how I am. I'd rather get up and going, and that's how I heal better for me personally. And so I was fine. I had no problems, but I was just like, I would rather you be home when we're able to bring him home and have that first family time together, versus you just sitting at home doing nothing while we're waiting to see when he's going to come home.
And luckily my work was really cool. And they were very understanding. And so I work from home, and so they would allow me to take my laptop. There was a couple times I just took my laptop up to the hospital and worked from there, so I could spend more time with Bridger and not be stuck at my desk for 8 hours a day. And so that was a huge blessing in itself as well.
Yes. Yeah, that was so nice. So yeah, now I guess we'll kind of chat a little bit. I briefly mentioned about the breastfeeding and all of that. And so basically what happened with that was the first day, like I mentioned, the doctor asked, and we had, so with a NICU, it is hard because you're not just assigned one doctor and 1 or 2 or 3 nurses. You don't know who's going to be your nurse and doctor for the day until you literally,
at the hospital we were at.
Yes, at the one we were at, until you got there for that day. And you're like, okay, who are we going to have today? It was always a guessing game. And that also was so frustrating and challenging because we, like Caleb mentioned, there were several nurses who we absolutely adored and got along with, loved. They were so good with Bridger. Like, we loved them. And then there was others who we didn't really see eye to eye with. And so it was just hard on that part too. But anyway, the first doctor that we talked to that we had the day after Bridger was born asked me about if I was going to breastfeed formula, what I was going to do. And I said, yes, just want to breastfeed as much as I can. Don't really want to give formula at all. I'm the type of person, I just would, if I can breastfeed, that's what I want to do. And I was able to with Bryn, so I was assuming I would be able to with him as well. So I started pumping. Obviously, yes, was able to pump. My milk came in. He said, okay, that's fine. We won't give any formula unless he absolutely needs it and you're not making enough milk, is how we left the conversation. And so I'm like, okay, great. He's getting all my milk. He's doing well. All great. Well, we get into about 3 weeks into his stay in the NICU, and it comes up in, so they would have morning rounds every morning, and we would try to be there as much as we could for them. Basically, they'd go around to each baby's bedside and just say what the plan was for the day, how well the babies were doing, and what kind of are the steps moving forward. And so when they got to Bridger's, they mentioned, they didn't say formula, but they said what?
They said we were going to supplement like vitamins.
No, it wasn't vitamins, but they said they're going to add, basically they're supplementing
the breast milk.
Yes, the breast milk. And so I waited till they were done. But that like, I looked at Caleb and I was like, what? Like, so as soon as they stopped talking, I asked our nurse, I was like, what are they talking about? And she's like, oh, well, they're adding some formula to your breast milk. And I literally looked at her, I was like, why? I'm making plenty. And she's like, yeah, I know, but it's just for like, to help their neurological development and all this stuff. And like, here's where we differ with doctors and medical staff and that kind of stuff. I believe that breast milk is all that your baby needs, especially in that first, 6 to 9 months, or even up to 12 months. That is all your baby needs, is your breast milk. God designed the female body to provide exactly what your baby needs. Nothing else. Your baby does not need anything else but your body and your breast from that breast milk. And so,
that way for thousands of years.
Yes. And so in my mind, when I heard that, I was like, what? And then also the fact that they did not ask me if they could start supplementing. And I don't know how long they had started or when they started supplementing. So basically what we would do is we would go up there, and I was only able to go up there twice a day for feeds. So when I started being able to breastfeed him around the 2-week mark, I was only able to do it twice a day because it was like I had Ren at home. I still had to care for. Caleb was still working, so I couldn't just be up there all day in order to do any more feedings with him. So as most I could do was 2. Other than that, I was bringing up fresh milk every single day. They were giving it to him in a bottle. And yeah, so when I found that out, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you didn't even ask me if that was okay. Oh, I was so ticked. And so, so the plan, we were dealing with so much else. I was just like, whatever. It was a small amount, they said. And so I was just like, whatever. I wasn't going to fight it because we were fighting so many other things with them. And so anyway, when we were to go home is that we were supposed to give a full bottle of breast milk one time for his replacement feeding, and the rest could be on the breast. Yeah, that did not happen. That did not happen. Nope. I was like, I'm sorry, but I'm the mama. What I say goes, and what I know what's best for my baby. And if you were a mama and you were questioning and it's your first time, or you're pregnant and it's your first time, just know your mama gut is what you go with. You go with that because you know what's best for your baby. Don't let anybody or any doctor tell you what is best. You know what's best for your baby. And even though you're like, well, I don't know, I've never had a baby before, or, I've never been in this type of situation before, or whatever, trust your gut. I promise you're going to be in that situation after you have that baby, or if you already have it and something comes up and you just are like, I don't know, I'm not sure what to do. say a quick prayer or just sit there for a few seconds and something is going to come to you. I believe personally that it's God giving you that wisdom, but you can, if you don't believe that, you can believe whatever you want, but something will come to you and you'll know what to do right there in that moment.
Well, and you can also, I mean, if you want to take the doctor's advice, fine, but listen to your gut and also do your own research.
Yes.
Like, you won't believe how much like research we did while we were in the
Yes.
NICU. Like, so yes, I'm not like I said earlier, doctors, what they say aren't necessarily bad.
No.
It's just take their advice, like
With a grain of salt.
with a grain of salt, and listen to your own gut, listen to your instincts, and do what's best for your kid.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, basically when he got home from the NICU the first day, I started breastfeeding and continue, like totally. No, did not do any formula. Didn't even buy formula because I was like, that is not going to happen. I'm going to feed my child. And I did. And I have been able to, and he's now 10 months.
They tried to tell us, before you can go home, we're going to have to give you some
Yeah.
formula so you can take him home.
Yeah.
And then they never actually wound up giving us
No.
that formula. And I told Kim, I was like, we're not even going to call him. We're not going to say
Nope.
anything. Like, we're just going to.
Because we wouldn't have used it anyway.
Yeah, we wouldn't have used it. And so the rest of the NICU journey, I mean, there was tons of hills and
Yes.
mountains to climb. And unfortunately for us, there was a lot of moving goal lines. Every time we thought we were going to get close to coming home, we thought we were going to get to come home maybe after like a week. And then it turned into 2 weeks. And then it turned into another 2 weeks. Like, and it just, the goal lines, because some little thing would happen that would keep resetting it.
Yeah.
Now, this is probably what's going to make people mad, but I do believe in a sense that we were held hostage by the NICU.
For sure.
Because there was times like he would be super healthy and we'd be like, all right, what's the goal today? Like, and they would never tell us like what the goal was. Like, it was just like, they just held him there to hold him there. Like, and we'd be like, okay, like, is it breathing? Is it this? Can we try to wean down the oxygen some more today? Like, me and Cam are the ones who had to push them to progress. So like, if Cam and I didn't push them to progress, I feel like honestly we could have been there for 50 to 100 days, like, because they just always like just kept them stagnant, like didn't want to really. And so Cam back, can we turn like the oxygen down a little bit more? And then after us begging, they kind of knock it down a little bit more, and then eventually
or they'd be like, well, we got to watch him to see, and I don't know if he's ready. And I'm like, just try.
Well, and basically, like, he's on breathing machines all the time, so you can monitor. Like, when you're at the NICU, you just watch these machines and these screens all day. And every time we were there, he was, like, breathing, like, 95 to 100%, which is amazing. Like, even as adults, we don't always breathe 95 to 100%. So he's always really high, and then it was always conveniently when we would leave, he would have somehow a dip or something like that. And so it just felt like there was moving goal lines, moving goals, and if it wasn't for Cam and I really pushing him to progress, I feel like he would have been there even longer. And so basically he had to wean himself all the way off of oxygen, also wean himself off the feeding tube. The feeding tube was done midway through.
That was done around the 2 week when I started breastfeeding, because then he started taking bottles and he was taking it just fine.
And he's always liked eating. Yeah. And so leave it to that kid. But the oxygen thing was the thing that we just fought. And so we'll get into this story a little bit. This is probably the point that broke Kimmy and I probably the most. We got to, what day was this probably?
It was about 3 weeks.
Yeah, it was about 3 weeks in, and we our midwives. They were awesome. They checked in on us even though we were in the NICU and stuff like that, and we were still under their care. And they said, hey, we've had kids in the NICUs in other hospitals. Like, why don't we write up a game plan in order to get Bridger home? And so they're like, we'll provide you a oxygen tank, and we'll provide you, like, basically almost round the clock. So you're
kind of forgetting a story here. So we were supposed to, we had a game plan with the NICU. Yeah. They had taken him off his breathing. At this point, he had to be off for 48 hours in order to, and in room air, and in order to go home. And so they decided, well, he pulled out. They were going to wait a few hours until that night or whatever to start the trial, but then he decided to pull out. And he was notorious for pulling out his IVs, pulling out his breathing tubes, all of that. He did it so many times.
Which is funny. I think that was his way of saying, like, guys, I'm good.
Yeah, he was trying to tell him. He's like, guys, I don't need this. But anyway, so he pulled it out. So they're like, okay, I'm just going to leave it off, and we're going to see how he does. And we got into literally hours before the 48-hour mark was up, and he had a dip overnight.
Supposedly one little dip.
And so I got a call we were preparing, this was a Friday night, we were preparing that next morning to be able to go up there. We were going to do the car seat test, and if he passed that, we'd be able to take him home. And so that morning, I'm getting ready we just ate breakfast. I'm getting ready so we can go up there, do the car seat test and everything. We're so excited. We were thinking like, okay, this could be the day, either today or tomorrow. This could be the day we get to bring him home. And at this point, it had been 3 weeks. And so I get a call as I'm getting ready that he had a dip, supposedly, overnight, and therefore they had to put him back on oxygen.
Which restarts the whole process.
Yes. And when I tell you, my heart sank. I was so frustrated. I literally just started crying. I came downstairs as soon as I got off that phone call, and Caleb knew something was. I told him, and I just cried and cried, and we were so frustrated, so defeated. We just felt like, it's just like when you're waiting for something for so long, and like your heart just gets crushed like in an instant. And that's how it felt like.
Well, and we'd been working so hard, like for those, it was like 14 or 17 days around this point to work him off his oxygen, to get him it had
been longer than that because it was at 3 weeks. So the 21 days at least.
And so, and he was progressing really well. And so we worked so hard to get to this point. And as soon as they put oxygen back on, it's basically back to square one. And so, our midwives, so to get back to the previous story, our midwives checked in with us and they're like, hey, how's it going? We talked about how frustrated we were because we're literally the only thing keeping him from coming home was his oxygen. Yes. So our midwives were like, well, hey, we can provide an oxygen tank for you guys, and a baby oxygen tank. And we'll provide kind of round the clock care, if you will, on the call care for you guys. And you can just bring the baby home on oxygen. We've done this numerous times with other midwives. And so we're like, sweet. So our midwives, once again, were amazing. Yes. I will shout their praises for the rest of my life. Yes. They were awesome. And they wrote up this nice game plan form for us to give to the doctors. And
and then we went in that day, and I remember going in that day, and I was holding him, and I remember telling Caleb, his color looks off. Yeah. I was like, he looks pale. He was he wasn't wanting to eat. All he was wanting to do was sleep. He wasn't even waking up for us. He just wanted to sleep, and he didn't want to eat, which wasn't like him at that point. He was eating his bottles. He was taking all of his feeds. He was doing great. But that day he didn't want to eat. He was just kind of lethargic and wasn't really responding to us. And I was like, I don't know, like, again, the mama gut. I was just like, something just doesn't seem right.
Yeah. And so later that night, like we handed out the paperwork that our midwives wrote up to the hospital to say, hey, this is our game plan to get Bridger out of here. Like, our midwives are going to take care from here. They have an oxygen tank. And they basically, once again, kind of held us hostage, and we're like, oh no, your insurance isn't going to approve.
Well, I literally had to fight to even get the note to the doctor because I talked to one of the nurse practitioners, and they didn't even want to give it to the doctor. They basically were trying to shut me down right then and there. And I said, no, this is a game for, like, why can we not break? I need answers, specific answers as to why. Mm-hmm. And so then they finally gave it to which wasn't even one of our doctors. It was just a random doctor on call who isn't even in the NICU. It wasn't usually working in the NICU. Mm-hmm. She just happened to be that night. And anyway, so long story short, I started crying again. And by the time that doctor came in, I was just so frustrated and so fed up. I felt like nobody was listening to me. Nobody understood what I was going through, because I knew that nurse, that doctor, neither of them had ever been a parent of a baby in the NICU. So they had no clue what it was like. And so I was just, at that point, we had been there 3 weeks. We had gotten our hopes up those last couple of days, thinking we were going to bring our baby home, and then to get him crushed again. And so it was frustrating.
Well, and to give you some insight on me, I'm not a type to get frustrated. I'm a kind of go with the flow kind of person. I've never yelled at anybody a day in my life. Like, I don't even have that in me. I've never thrown a punch or anything like that. But I told Cami, like, during this is the amount of stress I was under. I was like, I could literally almost yell. I didn't say cuss them out, but I probably could have almost at that point. I was like, I could yell at them, and I literally was ready to drive my fist through a wall. Like, and I'm not even joking when I say that. Like, that's the amount of pressure and stress we were under at this point, where I was like, yeah, man, I'm so frustrated. Like, I could literally punch something. Like, and so it's just, you don't understand, like, once again, the stress that NICU parents are under.
Yeah.
I think we calculated, like, in those 37 days, we had made over 100 trips almost up to the hospital. And like, it was just an extremely stressful time.
With a 19-month-old at home to take care of still, and to try and figure out where she needed to go each literally every single day. Yeah. So that night, so we went home. He still wasn't doing great, but he wasn't doing like horrible or anything. No. So anyway, we get ready to get into bed that night, and I get a phone call from the doctor there on call. And she basically tells me that he started to run a fever, wasn't doing real good, still wasn't taking his feed. So they were going to run some tests, and they'd let me know first thing in the morning what was going to happen. And I was like, okay, all right, sounds good. I don't know what's going on, but okay. So I get another call first thing in the morning. They run several tests. All of those came back negative. They were going to run a couple more, and then by that time, the results would be in by the time we got there that morning. And so when we got there that next morning, he was pale as pale could be. All of his color was pretty much gone. He was so lethargic, was not eating. I think they even I don't know what they did for food for him that day, but he was not doing well at all. And come to find out, he had gotten a UTI from being in the NICU.
Which can be very common in uncircumcised babies. Yes. Now, don't come first for hate in the comments, but we did circumcise Bridger now, but they wouldn't allow us to do that
in the NICU.
In the NICU, you had to get out of the NICU before they would do that procedure, and so it can be very common, especially in newborn uncircumcised males, to get UTIs. So, due to the fact that we had him in the NICU, we couldn't get him circumcised,
and therefore he got a UTI.
Led to the UTI, and So basically that led to...
So then we're in that meeting, yes.
That morning meeting.
That morning. And they're going over all the procedures, everything, what he's doing, how he's doing, what is going to happen with him. And we learn in that meeting, and at this point, no, it hadn't been 3 weeks. It had been 4 weeks he'd been in the NICU. Because at this point, we had been in there 4 weeks.
This was day 27.
Yes. And we learn that he is going to have to be put on antibiotics. And those antibiotics are going to have to be for 10 days.
And so I even asked, if it's just a one-time a day antibiotic, can we just either just bring him up here once a day or even just give him an antibiotic ourselves? To do it? And they're like, nope, it's mandatory. He's got to stay here for 10 more days.
Yep.
And at this point, Bridger was clear off everything. He was off feeding tubes. He was basically off his oxygen by this point.
Almost.
Yeah. And so he was basically to the point of ready to go home. And so he basically had to lay 10 days in the NICU just to receive antibiotics once or twice a day. And otherwise, he was completely healthy, completely ready to go home.
And then they had to, after about 2 days, I think it was, of him being on the antibiotics through an IV, because he kept ripping them out, and because they had put, at this point, being in there for 4 weeks, they had put so many IVs in from his head, both arms, anywhere that they could, that those veins weren't good anymore, basically. So they had to go in and put a PICC line, which is where they go under the skin and it goes to the outside of his heart, in order to run the antibiotics through that PICC line, which was not something I wanted at all, and I pushed against it. But at this point, there was nothing else, basically, they told us that they could do. I don't know if that was true or not, but I was so tired of fighting. I was so over it. I was just like, whatever's going to get him out there faster. But when I tell you, that day turned a corner for us in not a good way. I went in to feed him that night.
Well, keep in mind, before this point, Bridger was a super calm kid.
Oh, in the NICU. Yeah, the chillest baby.
Chill, never honestly really cried.
No.
Even the NICU nurses, they were like, he's such a calm kid. He's just the easiest kid to take care of.
I think even one of them mentioned to us, yeah, we don't even have to do anything to him. We just feed him and leave him alone. Because, and I was like, as a mom, that's not really what you want to hear about your baby, that he's just being left there by himself all day, every day, besides feeding. So anyway, when I went in to feed him that night, I could hear him screaming from down the hall when I walked in. And as soon as I walked in, the nurse goes, yep, he woke up about 30 minutes ago. I've been trying to hold him off because I knew you were coming to feed him. But she's like, he was not having it. They gave him not a sedative, but something to calm him, basically, to just be calm, in order to put the PICC line in, obviously, because they didn't want to put him completely under. And so when he kind of came to of that stuff, he was angry. And that is the first time I heard him scream so bad. He screamed bloody murder.
It wasn't a newborn scream. It was like an angry Hulk scream.
Oh, it was so loud. He screamed at me for literally 15 minutes. No joke. I looked at my watch, because I tried to feed him. I tried to calm him. I tried everything. He was not calming down. He was screaming at the top of his lungs. And finally, we just had to resort to giving him a bottle. And I worked and worked and worked. And he finally took it after about 20 minutes of screaming. It was so bad. And I felt so horrible leaving that night thinking, what the heck did they do to my baby? That is literally how I felt. And I know that they were just doing what they needed to. And again, we're not trying to harp on doctors and nurses. They are in the field for a reason. But when you are on this side of it, it does not feel like that. And it feels like they're just, like Caleb said, kind of just holding your baby hostage. And I know they're trying to help him, but it at times it did not feel like that, to be honest. And this was one of those times. And I just, that night, I remember thinking, what what did we do? Did we make a mistake by telling him, yes, they could put the PICC line in? Should I have pushed for keeping the IV and trying again? Like, I don't know. But yeah, ever since then, he found his lungs real good.
And and that's when sometimes some of his temper tantrums started. Like ever since that day, like, literally to this day. Like that's what we think that's where it honestly started from. And so we'll kind of fast forward through the rest of the rest of the NICU is pretty uneventful. Like it was just the antibiotics in the morning. And he laid there for 10 days, and then we did the car seat test and
passed out with flying colors, which we knew he would.
He passed that really easily, and then finally after day 37, we finally got to go get him.
And they wanted us out first thing in the morning.
They were like, you guys can come here as early as you want. Like, and so I think they're kind of tired of us.
They were fed up with us.
Like I said, there is some people that were at our hospital that were excellent. Like, I want to reiterate that.
We even have a picture with several of our nurses we loved. It is in Bridger's room to this day. We framed it, and because we absolutely loved those nurses.
And the thing this is for if there is any medical professionals listening, the ones that we loved were the ones who really tried to sympathize with us and would talk to us like we were humans and not patients. Like we had a lot of nurses, like one of them was our age, and she was super awesome and just talked to us like we were friends. And that honestly made it such a nice connection. And we had another nurse who honestly was the one nurse who kind of fought for us. And so there was good people in the hospital. I'm not saying everyone was bad. And so, and honestly, like even leaving like the NICU after 37 days, it was an emotional day. Like I had tears in my eyes saying bye to some of them because they honestly, after 40 days with them,
they become your family.
Become like family. And so we finally got out of the NICU and brought him home, and it was the day before Thanksgiving. And so that was kind of our goal.
We were hosting Thanksgiving at our house.
At our house. And so we brought him home. Ren finally got to meet him. Ren didn't get to meet him for those whole 37 days. We would show Ren like FaceTimes and stuff like that, but she could never meet him. So she finally got to kind of put two and two together that he was home. And then we had Thanksgiving the next day.
We did. And we were running off maybe an hour and a half total of sleep.
Pretty much.
From that night. That first night home was rough.
Yeah. And so we'll talk a little bit about NICU babies. Like a lot of times you hear about the NICU babies in the hospital, and then once you think they get home, everything's good. But maybe that is the case for some, but it wasn't the case for us.
Not for us.
And so Bridger has never been an easy kid to settle. No. He's never been an easy kid. And honestly, it was ever since that PICC line day, like up to that PICC line day, he was the most chill newborn of all time. Like even with all the wires and the
besides pulling him out, but he would never fuss. He would never scream. No. He was super chill. He was so relaxed, so chill. And obviously, I know babies can change as they get older, obviously. But at that point, it had been 4 weeks, and he was the same baby since he'd been born. Like, he was so chill, so relaxed. I was like, okay. And Rin was not a chill baby. So I was like, okay, maybe we're going to finally get our chill baby. Like, but anyway, it took I think it was about 2 weeks after he got home. And I don't know what it was. I don't know. He literally, after he had been home for about a week and a half to 2 weeks, he started those first couple weeks, he was fussy. He was super fussy, just unsettled. Just like we were trying to figure out, and I was like, I was like, okay, this is just him trying to figure out home life. Like from the NICU, obviously it was different.
And they did warn us in the NICU that the adjustment at home is hard because in the NICU, they're so used to routines and they're used to habits that they've learned. They're used to the sounds and the lights and the noises of the hospital. And so they said going home it would be a hard transition, but we didn't know.
And we tried to keep it as much like the NICU. I fed him every 3 hours, just like they did.
We kind of kept a nightlight on in his room so he could have light around him.
We had sound machines, just like they had sounds. Obviously, it's not quite the same sounds, but he was in the bassinet next to our bed, so he wasn't alone. And we kept the light on for nightlight for him. Like, we tried to keep this similar things for him, just like they had at the NICU. He literally then after about those 2 week mark, he literally for the next 3 months, if not a little bit more, screamed and cried and fussed all day long.
And when I say scream and cried, it's not just like I said, not just baby.
No, crying. Not like a wah.
We call it. I called it throat screaming because he would scream from literally the back of his throat.
Yeah.
And literally to this day, 10 months later, he still has a raspy voice because of the throat screaming he did when he was a little baby.
And it's like when he was doing that, it's like somebody was hurting him, is like his scream. It was not like I'm hungry or I'm tired. It was literally like somebody was hurting him. And there was nothing I could do that would calm him. And Caleb was working. He was back at work. He only had about a week and a half off with us. Maybe, about 2 weeks. But he was back at work, and granted, he was working from home, which was nice, but at the same time, not for him because he had to hear that upstairs. And Rin is transitioning to having a baby in her life, a new baby.
And sharing attention.
And she'd never had to share attention before. And so she was kind of starting to regress a little bit. And then Bridger was doing what he was doing. And literally there were so many times Caleb would come upstairs for lunch. And I would be sitting holding Bridger. He was screaming. I was crying. And then Rin would be either crying or trying to get my attention or wanting me to play with her and I would look at Caleb and just be like, I don't know what to do. I'm done. Like, I can't do this anymore. Like, it sucked. Like, I can't explain that enough.
And it's really hard because, like I said, we took him to chiropractors. Yeah. We took him to midwife. Our midwives have follow-up appointments, and everyone's like, he's healthy, he's good.
There's nothing wrong.
There's nothing wrong. And so it was really hard trying to find the answers. Like he never spit up. Like, so it wasn't like
he did have some reflux type stuff,
but it wasn't super heavy.
No,
and so it was just really weird. Like, we couldn't figure out what was going on, and like all we could channel to was he's just a NICU baby. And also I'm the type, I know I'm going to get crap for this too, but I never took Ren to a doctor. I obviously believe that they have them for a reason, but I am more, like I said, natural, homeopathic type of person. I will take to chiropractors or midwives, do all of that a million times over before I resort to going to a doctor. If there's something seriously wrong that I can tell, obviously, yes, I'm going to take my child. Bone, a broken leg,
the head split open. Like, obviously, I'm going to take them to a doctor. But I'm not just going to go if they're running a fever or have a cough or, that type of stuff. So with Bridger, I did not want to take him to a doctor, mainly because I knew they were just going to want to put him on medicine. And I did not want that. That is not, I don't believe in just putting a bandage over something which is a medicine, just because you don't want to get to the root cause of the issue. And I knew that's what they would want to do. So that's why I did not want to take him. And so for those 3+ months, we fought and did research and tried to figure out and tried to soothe them. And Bridger also, ever since he came home, was a baby that you could never just put down and put him down for a nap or put him down at bedtime, even if I fed him to sleep.
It was always a 45-minute to an hour process.
It was a battle, and he would scream the whole time, regardless if I was holding him, if Caleb was holding him, he would scream. And so it wasn't literally until about 2 months ago, maybe
about 2 months ago. So 8 months into his life,
9 months. He's almost 11.
9 months,
that he literally we've been able to feed him and put him down, and he will go to sleep.
And actually somewhat stay asleep. So like Bridger, since he was so used in the NICU, they will come up every 2 hours to feed, to check, every 3 hours to feed, to check on him. And so he got so used to that for the first literally 8 months of his life, he would wake up at least 3 to 5 times a night.
And we're not exaggerating when we say 3 to 5+ times a night.
Like literally in his entire time we've had him, which to this day is a little over 10 months. He's only slept through the night twice.
3 times, because he did.
That's true.
Yeah, he did when he first, the week he came home,
one night. That was a rare one.
It was
I think he was
very
just tired
rare.
of being in the NICU.
I think so.
But he always woke up. I'm not kidding. At minimum 3 to 5 times a night. And so Cam and I, sleep didn't exist for 8 months.
No.
And finally, he's finally to a point right now where he'll only wake up about 1 time a night, which is usually a huge blessing.
Yes.
And he's starting to get more comfortable, and he'll fall asleep really quick now. He's starting to get into routine. But that's how hard it was to break the NICU habits and
and try to get him on a routine in general. And with Rin, I was the type of mom, I was super strict with routines, with sleep schedules. She started napping in her crib after about a week of being born. I was super strict about that. But with Bridger, obviously, when he first came home for the first about 2 weeks, I held him more than I did for Rin. I held him for naps.
It was also to try to make up time because we couldn't hold him all the time. So you want to hold your baby more because we haven't for 40 days almost. We couldn't.
But then when I started working with him on sleeping in his crib, on taking a nap, it was such a battle. I could not go more than about 20, 25 minutes of him sleeping after I fought him for a long time to get him to sleep. Then he would sleep in his crib for like 20, 25 minutes and wake up. It literally on the dot. He would not go any longer than 30 max minutes. And that was up until about 2 months ago as well. Which was so frustrating because it's like, I need you to sleep, because I knew if he would sleep better during the day, he would sleep better at night. It's common knowledge, but I could not. And we tried everything. We tried every single method. We tried every tip, parenting tip, baby sleeping tip that is out there. We took the taking care of babies course with Rin. So we tried doing that method with Bridger. Did not work. Tried the Ferber method, whatever, tried Cry It Out, tried so many different things. Bridger is just his own child. And
it was really frustrating. So there was times like me and Cammie, we love Bridger with our whole heart.
Absolutely.
Like he's my son. I wanted a son my whole life. But there was times, honestly, we can say in this first year that we didn't like our kid. And that's really hard as a parent to say. Like that you love your kid but don't like it, because it was just such a stressful time.
We were both sleep deprived, so we're not sleeping. So we're frustrated. He's frustrated because Bridger, because he's obviously tired too from not sleeping. And so it's just like this vicious cycle. But everything we tried, everything we did, nothing helped. And taking him to the chiropractor and midwives, and they're all like, yeah, he's fine. Like, he seems fine. There's nothing wrong. Like, it's so frustrating when you don't have those answers and you don't know what to do. That is one situation where I literally just had to pray. Like, I just had to turn to God, because I was like, I don't know what to do. Nothing is helping. Nothing I've tried is working, and I don't know what to do. And it has been a very frustrating last year with him, honestly.
But well, fast forward to these last 2 months. I don't want to think like you guys think we don't like our kids. So Bridger now, he's now getting better into routines. Kim and I are catching up on sleep finally. He's the easiest kid to make laugh. Like, all you have to do is turn your head really fast.
Literally turn your head.
And just look at him and he'll laugh. Like, and so he's finally to a point where we enjoy being around him, and he's fun to be around. He eats like a full-grown man. Oh my gosh, so much. I'm pretty sure he eats more than me some meals. And so he's healthy. He's doing well. But it just shows that it can NICU babies. No NICU baby is the same than the next, and some babies can probably break this habit soon. Bridger, we honestly believe it took about 8 months to break out those NICU habits. And so to kind of wrap up this episode, I want to talk a little bit about, because I always like for people to take something away, and I think advice for people in the NICU or advice to help people in the NICU. And so I'll go first, and then if you want to add, you can. And so one thing that I will say is we had a great support system around us. And so if you know of somebody who's in the NICU, first off, reach out a hand, and don't just say like, hey, if you need anything, let me know, because NICU parents aren't going to reach out to you, because we don't want to be a burden on anybody else. Just step up and do something. What I mean by that is we had such a good support system around us. We had people who sent us DoorDash gift cards. We had people who sent us gas gift cards. We had people who took Rin for us. And honestly, as believers, I remember 2 moments touched me really, I guess you could say really hard. And one was when our church family prayed for us. After church, we'd always have to sprint straight to the NICU. So before we sprinted to the NICU, they took the time and prayed for us, our whole congregation. And then second time, one of Cammie's friends group, or it's our friends group that's Cammie's known for a long time, we went to their house, and our whole friend group surrounded us and just prayed for us. And if there's something that you need, is people to stand by you and pray for you during that time. And that was so important, so meant the world to me. And so I say all that to say, if you know someone going to the NICU, I always say, like I said, don't just say, oh, let me know if you need anything. Just step up and do it. Just buy the gift card. Even if you have to go just sit up at the hospital with them, just be there to support. Because that's what I try to do now. Is I have friends who have gone to NICU, and it's hey, what can I do? What do you want me to do to help? And then if they say nothing, then I'm gonna find something to do. And that's what I'm gonna do. And so just be a helping hand. And if you're a NICU parent, my advice to you is stay strong. I know that's the cheesy thing to say. Like I said, I was about to drive my fist through a wall. But just lean on God. Don't lean. They say don't lean on your own understanding. Lean on His understanding, and just communicate with your spouse. Communicate your frustrations. Communicate what you're feeling. Communicate, and even when doctors are telling you stuff, communicate with them. That was probably the thing with the NICU that frustrated us the most. is we eventually had a come to Jesus talk with our NICU staff, and we're like, you guys just need to communicate with us. Like, you have to talk with us. Like, you have to tell us what's going on, because you guys are doing one thing, we're expecting another thing, and so communication is key. And so communicate very well with your spouse, communicate well with your doctor and nursing staff, your expectations, and that would be my advice. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
I just, the only thing I would say is, when you're in that situation and you're a parent of a baby in the NICU, the best thing I found to do is lean on your spouse. Like, for me, because you're both in it together, it's not going to do any good for you to be at each other's throats, because you're both frustrated, you're both tired, you're both unsure of the future, unsure of what's going to happen or what's going on. It's all new to you. The best thing you can do is lean on each other, pray with each other, talk with each other, communicate with each other, just be there for each other, especially if you have other kids also. Because you're both going through it for the first time. You don't know what to expect. You don't know what happened. And it's so easy to just be frustrated that you could be frustrated with each other, or pick little fights, or be in disagreements, but that's not going to help the situation, and that's not going to help you guys either. So just keep the peace, pray with each other, be at peace with each other, and just communicate and lean on one another. That's going to help tremendously.
Yeah. And just know that, like I said, no two NICU journeys are the same.
Yeah.
I know for us, 37 days honestly felt like hell. Like, it was hell on earth. But at the same time, we had people in the NICU that were there for
way longer.
And and so everything's in perspective, but that doesn't take away what the struggles that everybody goes through. And
absolutely.
So never feel like you're alone in that space, no matter if you've been there for one day or whether you're going to be there for
a year plus.
Like, there was a baby that was there for a long time next to Bridger. And so it always kind of kept it in perspective, but just know that you're not alone in your journey. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the thing that helped us survive in the NICU, was kind of leaning on other NICU parents. We'd kind of talk to them as they were coming in and out of the area. And so leaning on other NICU parents and support groups. And there were so many people who had previous NICU kids in the NICU who were donating shirts and hats and fun and stuff like that for the NICU babies, just so you felt a little bit more at home.
Yeah.
And so that was a huge blessing as well.
Yeah. And another thing we didn't really touch on, I'll just mention it briefly, but my younger brother was actually in the NICU for 7 weeks, almost 7 weeks. He was born also, or no, he was in there for almost 6 weeks. He was born 7 weeks early. And that is one thing if I could go back and do anything, is, which, how would I have known? I don't know, but I wish I would have been able to talk to my mom and just get her perspective on all of that. We did talk about it a little bit, but when you aren't going through that, you don't think to really dive into that and ask about those types of things. And so that was hard for me. Also, just not having my mom there and knowing that she had gone through it, and I wished that I would have had her to be able to talk to that, and just to pick her brain and just be like, is this normal? What should I do here? What should I be asking? And that kind of stuff. So that was a challenge too for me.
I think that's the hard part about the NICU, is you never expect yourself to be in that situation.
Yeah.
So seeking advice for it, you might think this episode isn't going to apply to me, but if you're still in the baby making era of your life, like, there's always a chance. And so that's why we wanted to be a voice for parents who have gone through the same thing, knowing you're not alone, knowing how to support someone who's in the NICU, and like knowing the frustrations and the stress that they're under, and just being able to provide a helping hand if you have the ability to.
Yeah, so definitely.
But just know there's light at the end of the long NICU tunnel. Like I said, Bridger's such a fun kid now. We're enjoying him. He's starting to get close to walking. And so I was just looking at pictures and seeing him go from all tubed up in his nose and his stomach with IVs and all that. I was seeing a picture the other day, then seeing him now. Like, it's hard to believe that was just less than 10 months ago. So there is light at the end of the NICU tunnel.
It doesn't feel like it at the time.
No, it feels like when you're in it, it's never going to end. But then once you get out, you're like, you know what, that honestly wasn't as long as I thought it was. Like, and so you survive and you get out. And so we'll wrap up this week's podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review on any of the listening platforms you like. If you have any questions, like Cami said, you can blow up any of our Instagrams and ask a question. We'll answer it on the podcast, and we'll have an episode for you next Wednesday.
Yeah, so we appreciate it. Thank you again so much. Also share this episode if you feel like you have a friend or relative, anyone that you know of that is possibly going through the NICU experience, or or has gone through or whatever, you feel like they would enjoy it, we would appreciate it so much. So we will see you next Wednesday.
See you next week. Have a blessed
Bye.
week.